Hi everybody, great to see lots of you joining us for our GCSE English language session today. We have a session planned on fictional use of language, device and features, but as I said yesterday, with a different text. It's quite a broad topic, which is why we've kind of stuck to it for this week, but just to let you know that next week we will be moving on to something else, so stay tuned to find out more about that. The session will be an hour long as always, and it will be 45 minutes for Vicki, who is our tutoring the session to teach the lesson content, and then she'll be taking questions for 15 minutes at the end. But do send questions through as and when to the chat, because Vicki will be able to see them and respond to you when she can. Just to say that the webinar, the session will be recorded, and if you've signed up to the My Tutor online school, then you'll be able to access all of the lesson content afterwards in your own time, to watch the video back as you want. And I'm just going to hand over to Vicki now, who lots of you will probably know already if you've been around this week for these English sessions. But if you don't know Vicki, then as I always say, she's also a trained English teacher. So she's got lots of knowledge about how the exam papers work, and she'll be using that knowledge to feed into the session today. Thank you, Vicki. Over to you.
Fab. Good morning, everybody. So thank you very much for coming back. For those of you who are coming back. So yeah, today, very similar session, just with a different text. So today we're going to be looking at the lovely bones. Now, just before I start, so tomorrow I'm going to be looking at exam techniques, do's and don'ts, sort of tricks and tips, looking a little bit about what on earth the mark scheme means, what that language means, and decoding that a little bit with you. If there are any if you've got any big concerns, questions, something you would like me to go over again during this session, towards the end when we get to the questions section, let me know and I will plan it into next week's session, not next week's, tomorrow's session, to cover anything that you want me to go over again. So bear that in mind as we go along, and then if you've thought of anything when we get to the Q&A, just give me a shout, and if there's anything that requires me to go over other stuff or something that you want me to do again but slightly differently, then I will make sure that that is done for tomorrow's session for you. Okay, so first off then is our little starter activity. How many language devices can you remember? You did a really cracking job of this yesterday. Let's see if we can get them all really quickly. Alliteration, oxymoron, personification, metaphor, lovely, simile, yeah, repetition, senses, edit, onomatopoeia, lovely, juxtaposition, pathetic fallacy, length of sentences, semantic field, imagery, yep, description, yet detailed description, lovely, sibilance, fantastic, hyperbole, good. There isn't a lesson on Friday because it's a bank holiday, so we won't be having a lesson there. Present progressive verbs, well done for yesterday, so that will come in under word classes, not under language features and techniques, but very well done to remember that. Fabulous. So I'm rule of three. Yeah, I think we've got most of them. Symbolism I don't think has come up, but I think you guys have mentioned everything else. So cracking work, well done. So as I mentioned yesterday, we haven't really looked at sentence forms in terms of writing a response. So I thought we briefly on last week's session, I think on Wednesday, we looked at sentence forms, but it was sort of a whistle-stop tour. So I'm going to go through them again, and I'm going to talk to you about minor sentences, which we didn't speak about last week. So this comes under your third bullet point for sentence forms. This is something which I'm going to go over again a bit more tomorrow in terms of misconceptions of having to speak about sentence forms. So 4 sentence forms really that you need to know. So simple sentences, this is where we just have one verb. So they're relatively brief sentences because longer sentences require you to have more than one verb. So I went through these the other day. A little way to check if we've got a verb lurking is to inflect it for tense. So for example, with walk, you can put walking on the end, you can put walked, and we know that that is a verb. Wicked, this is something that came up with one of my students recently, and we worked out that actually it was an adjective, not a verb, because wicked, if we take off the ed, wick, yeah, that is a word, like a candle, but if we put in ing and have wicking, that isn't a word. So we know that that therefore isn't a verb. So that's a nice little test to do. If you think it might be a verb, see if you can inflect it for tense. This way only works for regular verbs. So if we've got irregular verbs like swim and swam, run and ran, where the vowel changes, instead of saying runned, we say ran. However, hopefully you should be able to work that out yourselves with, can I change it into present? Can I change it into past tense? Can I change it into progressive using ing? So that's a nice little tester for you. So compound sentences. So this is where we have two verbs and they are joined together with a conjunction. So a conjunction is words such as and, but, and both of these clauses can stand alone. So we can take each portion, and so for example here we could say Sally ate all the cake and Hattie drank all the lemonade. We could just say Sally ate all the cake, full stop, Hattie drank all the lemonade, and those would be two simple sentences. The other one being Jessica went home. We could put a full stop there and then say Holly stayed at the party, and we could just remove the but. So that's how compound sentences work. However, you need to be careful. So just because there is a conjunction, that doesn't mean that it is going to be a compound sentence. So for example, I bought fish and chips. So I can take I bought fish. That makes sense. I can't then just have a sentence which says chips. It doesn't grammatically make any sense. So be careful, just because there's a conjunction doesn't automatically mean it's a compound sentence. Now, minor sentences. Oh, I haven't got my complex sentences in there. So minor sentences, these are the ones that we haven't looked at before. So this is where we are missing something from a sentence. It's not grammatically correct. So there's a few different things. This isn't sort of quite as straightforward as you might expect it to be. So it all depends on the verb. So at the simplest level, we need a subject and we need a verb. So for example, I ran. I is the subject, ran is the verb. That is grammatically correct. So for it to become a minor sentence, we could just say ran or run. So this is something that you see quite often in children's literature, but this is something we're also going to see in today's text. So if we just have run as a sentence, that's a minor sentence because it's missing the subject. With some verbs, we need an object for it to make sense. So I read, I read. Now that would not make grammatical sense because we need to be reading something. It needs to be accompanied by an object. So the object here is book, but it also comes along with my, so an object phrase being my book. So if we took my book away and just said I read, that would be a minor sentence because it requires an object. Now when it gets a little even trickier is when we have a verb which requires a direct object and an indirect object. So gave is the big one that you tend to look at when you take this a bit further into A level. So I gave, if we just had I gave or I gave the book, that would be a minor sentence because we require a indirect object as well. So this is the direct object, so the thing that we're actually giving. And then we've got the indirect object here, Mary, we're giving it to Mary. So she is the person who is receiving the book. So if we just said, I gave, or I gave the book, that would be a minor sentence because we're missing the indirect object. Now, when it actually comes to looking at these in the exam, I really wouldn't worry about looking at minor sentences in terms of the last two, because you probably won't get them, but it's always good to know what different verbs require. Now, you're quite likely to get this one. If you're going to be talking about sentence forms at all, minor sentences and simple sentences are probably the ones you're going to comment on, because they usually have a very sharp effect in the text. So that's a really good one to bear in mind. My complex sentence has fallen off, so I'll just quickly go over that one. So complex sentences then is when we have two or more verbs and they are joined together. So for example, I went to the shop the other day, which I found really pleasant. So I went to the shop the other day. So went is the verb. I went to the shop the other day is a main clause. We can say that individually. However, we can't say which I found really pleasant. So found is the verb there, but it's what we call a subordinate clause. It needs to be attached to a main clause in order for it to make sense. Complex sentences not necessarily have that function. You might just find that there are semicolons which attach another main clause to another main clause. That's something we might see. So this is our question today. So how does the writer use language to describe Susie's mother? So again, we've got the same 3 bullet points there. I'm just going to have a quick look at the Q&A and the chat to see if I have missed anything. Can we go through different types of clauses? Yes, we can. I will do that tomorrow for you. So it's a bit more detailed and we've got loads of examples. So yeah, we will go through clauses tomorrow. I'm also going to go through identifying word classes and a few tips and tricks to help you do that. So in terms of proud smile, use of senses and detailed description, they're sort of little cheap ones really. Let's have a look at the chat. Yeah. Oh, I didn't know that wicking is a verb. Are imperatives minor sentences? Yeah, so this is something I'm going to go over in a bit more detail tomorrow. So imperatives, not necessarily minor sentences. So an imperative is an instruction. Yeah, I can't spell. There we go, imperative. So imperative is an instruction. So for example, go and fetch my drink. You see them a lot in recipes. So add 2 tablespoons of milk to the mixture. So it's directly telling you to do something. I'm going to go over different types of sentence types tomorrow in terms of imperative, exclamative, and interrogative and declarative. So I'm going to go over those tomorrow for you as well. It's not something that we really need for today, but I will go over those for those of you who are interested. Okie doke. So this is our little bit of context. So The Lovely Bones. So this is written in 2002 by Alice Sebold. A really nice book. I really recommend it. So this extract is taken from the beginning of the novel. The main character and narrator, so we've got it in first person, is a girl called Susie. I think she's about 13, 14. She is describing what the holidays were like. So this is written in past tense. So a little bit extra about the Lovely Bones. So Susie is a spirit, basically. She's writing, reflecting on her life. She has been murdered. It's an absolute gift of a text to work with. So I'm going to be looking at it for question 3 next week as well. So which pieces of information are important here and why? What do we need to bear in mind? So tomorrow, yeah, I'm going to go through sort of organisation a little bit. We're going to look at a level 3 and a level 4 answer and see what the difference is and see why, which one is better. This is an 8 marker. Can we go through texts that contain techniques and how to spot them? So that's what we've been looking at this week. That's why we're looking at a variety of texts. And there will be some for you to have a go at as well in the written content. Right, so yeah, it's from Susie's point of view, lovely, where it comes in the novel, yeah, beginning. So that's the most important one, I think. Yeah, we know it's a modern text, so it might give us an idea of a target audience. Yeah, lovely. The fact that she is dead. So this is something that I've told you as a little bit of background information about the text. So we can't say anything about that because we're not told about it. Right, okie doke, so let's have a look. So, Holiday was sitting near the bird bath, panting happily, but he did not notice me. He was watching my mother. She had a stare that stretched to infinity. She was, in that moment, not my mother, but something separate from me. I looked at what I had never seen as anything but Mom, and saw the soft powdery skin of her face. Powdery without makeup, soft without help. Her eyebrows and eyes were a set piece together. Ocean eyes, my father called her rather, when he wanted one of her chocolate-covered cherries, which she kept hidden in the liqueur cabinet as her private treat. And now I understood the name. I had thought it was because they were blue, but now I saw it was because they were bottomless, in a way that I found frightening. I had an instinct then, not a developed thought, and it was that before Holiday saw and smelled me, before the dewy mist hovering over the grass evaporated and the mother inside her awoke, as it did every morning, I should take a photograph with my new camera. So what I'm going to add on to that question, so I'm going to add on that we can talk about the holiday and we can talk about Susie's mother, and we can link those two things together. So in order to be able to answer the question fully as to what we've been given, we're going to talk about this holiday, but by talking about Susie's mother, we're going to reflect the mood of what holidays meant to her. So I've got one here for Susie's mother, and I've got one here. I'm sure I put holiday. Anyway, Susie's mother and holidays. So let's have a look at feature spotting. So what can we find? So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to shout some things that you think you can find out for me. Don't worry about sending me the quotation, but I'm interested into what you guys can find. So I'm just going to give you 2.5 minutes maybe to see what you can find from that little bit of text there. Personification, yeah, lovely. So that would be here. So Holiday was sitting. Lovely. Yeah, verbs and adverbs in there, but so that would be words and phrases. We're looking for language features and techniques at the moment. Hyperbole, alliteration, okay. bird bath being alliteration there, yeah. What else have you guys come up with? Repetition of powdery, yeah. Hyperbole that's stretched to infinity, yeah, lovely. Here's stretched to infinity. So yeah, hyperbole, yeah, this is an absolute gift of a text. There's so much you could talk about. So hyperbole, repetition of powdery. I also think, can skin actually be powdery? Because it says that she hasn't got any makeup on. So I think that could quite possibly, we could make an argument for a metaphor there. Yeah, there's lots of imagery going on in here. Yeah, we could effectively, like yesterday, I did put in, let's have a go at drawing this, but I'm a little bit aware of time, so I'm not doing that today. So yeah, we could pretty much, this is almost like an instruction for drawing what Susie's mum looks like. Okay, so let's go through a bit more rigorously then. So Holiday was sitting near the bird bath, panting happily, so that's personification again. But he did not notice me. He was watching my mother. She had a stare that stretched to infinity. She was, in that moment, not my mother, but something separate from me. So again, I think we can make an argument for a metaphor here, because she isn't separate, she is still her mother. So that's figurative. I looked at what I had never seen as anything but mum, and saw the soft powdery skin of her face, powdery without makeup, soft without help. We've also got the repetition of soft as well. Her eyebrows and eyes were a set piece together. Does anybody know what a set piece is? Is the last sentence a metaphor? Yes. Yeah, like two matching pieces of furniture, or a set effectively. So I'm thinking my grandmother has a very nice ornate little hand mirror which has a brush with it, and I think maybe a comb, and they're all matching, so that would be a set piece. Yeah, fantastic. Right. So I've highlighted some here. So I didn't highlight Holiday was sitting, but I highlighted panting. So there's those two personifications we could talk about together. I think I've highlighted everything else. Fabulous. Right. Ocean Eyes, my father called her when he wanted one of her chocolate-covered cherries. So we've got some alliteration going on there. Which she kept hidden in the liqueur cabinet as her private treat. And now I understood the name. I thought it was because they were blue. But now I saw it was because they were bottomless. So we could say either metaphor or hyperbole for those, I think, because, and you know, eyes can't be bottomless in the figurative sense, and it also sounds like an exaggeration in a way that I found frightening. So we've got some alliteration. I had an instinct then, not a developed thought, and it was that before Holiday saw and smelled me. So we've got personification here. Can someone tell me what the other device is, please? Running out of space. Use of senses, yeah, and sibilance. Sibilance was the one I was looking for. So you'll always find sensory description, even if it's just what you can see. But yeah, this is a more like sort of an extra dimension effectively, and sibilance. Before the dew mist hovering over the grass, so we've got more personification there. evaporated and the mother inside her woke as it did every morning. I should take a photograph with my new camera. Right, so I think that is everything there that we have looked at. So let's go back and eliminate some features. So first of all, we need to eliminate the ones that aren't related to Susie's mother, or at least in her description. So I'm not going to talk about the alliterative bird bath. Even if we were talking about the environment, it's not very exciting. We just call them bird baths. Whether it was decided that that alliteration was purposeful when they were first named, we don't know, but that is just their name. So there's no point talking about that. Panting happily. Now that is referring to Holiday itself as sort of a person. So that isn't referring to Susie's mother. She had a stare that stretched to infinity, so we could talk about that. But something separate from me. Now that's more referring to Susie. So I think I'm probably not going to worry about that one too much. Now, I could talk about the repetition of soft and powdery. So we could talk about that one, and we could talk about a set piece together, because I suppose that sort of creates a sort of order. So those are the ones that we could potentially talk about there. So let's have a look at the other one. So chocolate covered cherries. So that is just referring to something that Susie's mother hides away as a treat. That's not actually describing her. I suppose it's describing the playfulness of a character that she keeps treats hidden, but not what the treats are called. So we can't talk about that. They were bottomless, so that's referring to Susie's mother's eyes, so we can talk about that. And in a way I found frightening. Now, could we talk about that? That is referencing sort of how Susie feels about her mother, but I would say probably not. Holiday saw and smelled me, so that's all about the holiday and Susie, so probably not with that one. And June missed hovering, so that is about the holiday. Sorry, I'm losing my voice a little bit. So we've gone back and we've eliminated. So now we need to think about potentially, this is where we boost our marks a bit. How can we link features together? So for example, is there a particular use of tone, use of words and phrases, or subject matter? So I'm going to choose stare that stretched to infinity. So I'm definitely going to choose this one, and I'm going to link that back to bottomless eyes, because they're both talking about her eyes. So we can definitely talk about those two. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about sentences as well, but we will come on to that. So let's have a go at some modelling. So let me just look at some questions before we get onto that actually. Sibilance is a type of alliteration, so the s or sh sounds repeated at the beginning of words. It's a specific type of alliteration, but if you just put alliteration, you wouldn't be wrong either. That's interesting. I'm pretty sure it isn't, but that's a nice interpretation. Right, so let's have a crack at doing some live modelling. So in this extract, Seabold, so I'm using what I've been told in the context, uses detailed description. So I'm just getting a little bit extra. I could just say uses personification, but I'm getting a little bit extra terminology in there in order to inform the reader of Susie's mother's eyes, comma, open quotation mark. So, stare that stretched to infinity. So, now I'm going in with the use of personification. So, I'm focusing on the verb. Stretched demonstrates how overwhelmingly beautiful the mother's eyes are. So that's sort of a basic level analysis, a basic comment. So now I'm going to talk about the use of figurative language. Now, can anybody tell me what figurative language means, please? Oops. Yeah, so I'm going to go over sort of a terminology bank in terms of how you can revise for it, but there isn't a hierarchy of talking about a specific type of terminology gets you more marks. All terminology is good. It doesn't matter which ones you talk about. There aren't more that you can talk about that gets you more marks. Yeah, language that is not real. So it's the opposite of literal. So figurative language, so using metaphors, using personification, using similes. Yeah, absolutely. So it's sort of a blanket term for making comparisons to things that aren't real, over exaggeration, that sort of thing. So the use of figurative language is furthered by the use of the hyperbole. So both hyperboles and personification are types of figurative language. Then I'm going to talk about my quotation stretched to infinity. This makes the reader, so now I'm giving a impersonal, personal response, if you like. So I'm giving a blanket term, this makes the reader feel, instead of this makes me feel, but I'm still talking about how this might affect someone personally. So this makes the reader imagine that the narrator's mother's eyes are full of wisdom and understanding, something which resonates throughout her entire being, at least from Susie's perspective. Now, what is the problem here? What have I done in terms of saying that this is to do with the reader? Yeah, we're going to have a look at sentence forms shortly. I'm getting there, don't worry. Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know it was called holiday. Thank you very much for that. So yes, you're right then. So that wouldn't be personification. You are absolutely right. You won't lose marks if you write it personally. I just like to say this makes the reader feel instead of this makes me feel. So the problem is that this makes the reader imagine. I'm saying that this does happen. So I need to be tentative with my language. So this might make the reader imagine. So I haven't got a pool of all the readers that have ever read this book and got them all together and they've all decided that this is what they feel at this point. So I can say this might make them feel, it might make them feel something else. Right, from Susie's perspective, the metaphor, they were bottomless. So now I'm linking those two things together. I need to put a comma here. Could also provide evidence as to why Susie and her father are mesmerised by the woman. Lovely, right, and then I'm going to zoom in again. So the adjective bottomless has the connotation of being never ending. This therefore relates back to the hyperbolic phrase, stare that stretched to infinity. So I'm showing how they link together and what the purpose of both of them are and how that helps us. Comma needs to go there and reiterates to the reader how out of the ordinary Susie's mother is. Okay, cracking. So that's effectively a very nice high-level answer paragraph. There's lots of stuff going on there, and I've linked two different types of figurative language together, and I've used those quotations and I've sort of tried to link them into two. Right, let's quickly go and look at sentence forms then. So, do you think there's anything in there that is particularly interesting to talk about in terms of sentence forms? Usually we just see a lot of complex sentences. Is there anything in there that we could take a little bit further? How many marks would you get for this paragraph? So along with another paragraph of the similar level, 7 to 8 marks, which would be the top end. Just by itself, probably 6, because you need more than just one chunky paragraph. I haven't speculated. Interesting. So, see, I think I have. I've speculated in terms of that this might make the reader think. I can't say that all readers do think like that. And I've sort of speculated why this is done to reiterate the image. So I think there is definitely some speculation in there. Right. All right, okay. Okay, so the potential couple of sentence forms we could talk about. So, he was watching my mother and now I understood the name. So these are both examples of what types of sentence forms, please. Simple, yeah, absolutely. Right. So in this case, I would say yes, let's talk about sentence forms, because I think we could talk about why bother using sentence forms in what is otherwise a very long descriptive paragraph. And personally, I think the answer to that is to do with Susie's age. So what age is Susie? Can you remember what I told you before we started looking at this? So I think there's potentially a couple of interpretations. Yeah, 13 to 14, somewhere around that mark. I can't quite remember exactly. It's a long time since I read this book entirely. So I think the obvious one is to represent her age, absolutely. So let's have a crack at doing this, and then we should have time for some questions afterwards. So, on 2 occasions, Sebald chooses to use. So I'm saying why she chooses something, and what the effect of that is going to be. I'm going to give alternative explanations for this to show that I'm thinking about complex ideas and that I'm not just thinking about one thing and I'm very rigid in my thoughts. So Siebold chooses to use simple sentences, so I'm getting my terminology in there. He was watching my mother and actually let's put it like this. And now I understood the name. Siebold may, so I'm being tentative, Siebold may have chosen to do this because she wants to represent Susie's youth. So that's quite a simple explanation. And I'm going to take it further, hence using sentence forms which are easy to construct. Therefore, let's put a semicolon on, therefore, demonstrating a certain kind of innocence. So I'm relating to first her age, why that links to her age, and then why she might want to do that. I'm then going to take this a bit further and give an alternative analysis. So alternatively, and now I'm going to link this back to the question in terms of Susie's mother, because at the moment we're just saying, well, I think Susie uses this because she's young, which has nothing to do with the question. So I'm now going to link this back into the question of talking about Susie's mother. So alternatively, the author, so notice sometimes I'm using Siebold, sometimes I'm using author, you could use writer as well, just to give a bit of variety so you're not saying the same thing all the time. So that's quite a nice thing to do. So alternatively, the author may have chosen to do this in order to represent the simplistic nature of Susie's mother's beauty, one which is unquestionable and obvious. So I'm saying that this actually might be because we can't debate, or at least in Susie's mind, we can't debate that her mother is an incredibly attractive woman, and therefore we only need to give simple sentences to inform the reader that that's the case because it is so obvious. Right. So just to finish off then, how many types of sentences can you name, can you remember, and can you put them in order in terms of the amount of verbs that they use? I'll give you a minute or so and then we'll move on to questions. Minor, simple, complex, compound. Fantastic, yep. So with minor, sometimes you might just have the subject, you might just have one verb, but you will definitely only have one verb in a minor. Yeah, we'll have a look a little bit more at main and subordinate clauses tomorrow, just to clear that up for you a little bit, because I don't think I've done that justice today. Right, have a look in the Q&A chat. Yeah, now I understood the name shows thought and sort of a realisation, I suppose. Yep, so I'll go back over to the live modelling ones first. So, where are we? So that is the first one. So in this extract, Siebold uses detailed description in order to inform the reader of Susie's mother's eyes, stare that stretch to infinity. The use of personification stretched demonstrates how overwhelmingly beautiful the mother's eyes are. This use of figurative language is furthered by the use of the hyperbole stretched to infinity. This might make the reader imagine that the narrator's mother's eyes are full of wisdom and understanding, something which resonates throughout her entire being, at least from Susie's perspective. The metaphor "they were bottomless" could also provide evidence as to why Susie and her father are mesmerised by the woman. The adjective bottomless has the connotation of being never-ending. This therefore relates back to the hyperbolic phrase "stare that stretched to infinity" and reiterates to the reader how out of the ordinary Susie's mother is. And the other one, on 2 occasions, Sebald chooses to use simple sentences. "He was watching my mother, and now I understood the name." Sebald may have chosen to do this because she wants to represent Susie's youth, hence using sentence forms which are easy to construct, therefore demonstrating a certain kind of innocence. Alternatively, the author may have chosen to do this in order to represent the simplistic nature of Susie's mother's beauty, one which is unquestionable and obvious. Right, okay, so shall we move on to some questions for the last few minutes then? Frederica, have you found any which I haven't answered yet, which you would like me to go through?
I was just going to say, if you kind of were in the middle of something, that there's time, I think, to carry on for 5 more minutes, because you have been answering questions as they've come in.
Yeah.
So unless anyone else has anything specific that they want to ask, then please do ask that either in the chat or in the Q&A, but otherwise we can just carry on.
Okay. So in answer to basically, since the writer uses simple senses, therefore Susie is innocent, that's one possible interpretation. That's why I've given more than one interpretation. Is there any lessons on Friday? No, it's bank holiday, so you won't be seeing me on Friday or Monday. I assume because it's bank holiday as well. Is that right, Frederica?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. Sorry, I am here.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, so Friday is bank holiday, as is Monday. So we'll resume with all of the sessions, not just English, all of the sessions from Tuesday next week, and nothing on Friday this week.
Yeah. Fab. Right. So, what is your general essay structure? Yeah. So this is a really interesting question. I'm just aware that if I do sort of continue on, I think I would be losing the effectiveness of my paragraph and the quality if I furthered it. I'm generally quite happy with what I've written. So, in terms of, I've forgotten what my question was already now. In terms of general essay structure, so some of you might be taught P, which is point, evidence, explanation or analysis. Some might be taught PEEL, which is the same with link at the end. Peter, point, evidence, terminology, explanation, reader. So when it comes to AQA, they're trying to move away from having a rigid structure. So if I colour code what I've done with this one, because I think this one would be more helpful than the other one, because this one is much more extensive in terms of detail. So in this extract, Sebald uses this detailed description. So all of this first sentence here is my point, effectively. Then I've got my evidence. I'm rubbish at doing highlighters on here. Then I've got some terminology. So at the moment, I'm basically following Peter. Then I've got another piece of evidence. Then I go into my analysis. Then I've got a little bit more, which am I using? A little bit more terminology here. So this is basically all terminology. Then I'm going back and using a quotation, and then I'm using more analysis. So all the way through here. Then I'm going back and making another point. Well, that's more sort of terminology really that I'm moving that on to. So what was I using for terminology? Orange. Yeah, oh, I have used that one, right. And then quotation. Then I go back onto my analysis. Then I go back to terminology. So basically what I'm hoping I'm giving to you here is that there isn't a set structure that I'm using. I'm being relatively flexible. I am sort of doing point evidence, terminology. However, I'm not being restricted by it. I'm building and building and building on what I'm saying rather than saying, so if I just followed point evidence analysis, I would be saying in this extract, Seabold uses detailed description in order to inform the reader of Susie's mother's eyes. Stare that stretch to infinity. The use of personification demonstrates how overwhelmingly beautiful the mother's eyes are. And that would be it. However, I'm using different perspectives of how I can pull that quotation apart. So I've effectively got the strand of detailed description, figurative, hyperbolic language, personification. I'm making essentially 3 points and weaving them all together with just using one quotation. It's a very rich quotation to use. I'm then building on what I've said in terms of how I could interpret it, how I've analysed it by using another quotation to support that idea, and then further my ideas on top of what I've already given. So I'm not using a set structure. Now AQA likes you to do this because they like you to do detailed description. They like you to take things as far as you possibly can, squeeze as much information out of a quotation as you possibly can. Whereas if you just follow point evidence analysis, it limits you somewhat. So what I say to my students is use it as a basis to start off with because it's a nice way to get going, but don't feel straitjacketed and you can't go on and talk about things in more depth because you absolutely can, and that's what gets you the big marks. Right, in terms of tomorrow, is there anything that you would really like me to go over again? So can you shout those things out to me? Did I find English difficult? Yeah, I didn't like it at school. It just didn't spark for me. I was good at music and I was good at maths. Those were my favourites. And then I did it at A level and absolutely fell in love with it. So yeah, I didn't enjoy it that much and I did have to work hard at it. So I totally get why you might find it hard because I was totally there myself. Did I do introduction, 2 paragraphs and conclusion? No, I just did 2 paragraphs. You don't need an introduction and you don't need a conclusion for questions 2 or 3. You could do for question 5, you don't need to because that is your creative writing. Could you say that the number infinity is metaphorical, which links to soft powdered skin, giving the connotations of healthy ghost-like person? That's absolutely beautiful. You could say that she's godlike. That's really nice. In terms of teaching poetry, and I think some of you have also asked about what other text we're going to be looking at. So I'm going to throw that one briefly over to Frederica in terms of literature.
Yeah, so thanks, Vicki. So if you're wondering what's kind of coming up, just to say that we are looking into kind of expanding the subjects that we do offer to you guys, and where lots of you have asked for English literature texts, then that's something that's on our radar. And to say that the best way to find out what's coming up is to just make sure that you've signed up to the My Tutor online school, and then you'll be notified as and when we do add extra subjects to the schedule. Also, I've had some questions about where to access recordings. Again, if you have signed up to the online school, then you'll be able to be directed towards where the recordings are being hosted, so you can watch everything back in your own time as well. Are we going to do poetry? As I said, keep an eye out for an updated schedule in the next coming weeks. I don't think there's any more questions that have come through.
I will look at active and passive forms tomorrow as well. Yeah, I'm just asking for people to shout out to me if there's anything specific they want to look at tomorrow. Yeah, I will definitely look at active and passive with you tomorrow. More about forming questions. Yeah, so I'm going to be doing that tomorrow. Peter stands for point, evidence, terminology, explanation, reader. Do you use piece structure? I haven't heard of that one before, so no, I don't. But I will look about that. Do I normally use P paragraphs? No. I use them as a basis, but I take my explanation a lot further and I look at things in more detailed. The books that you need to know for your English literature exam are based on what you've been taught at school, so they might be a little different to other people's. I think that's everything. Oh, thank you very much to the person who said thank you for doing this. That's very sweet. I think that's everything, Frederica. I'm not sure I can find anything else.
I think we've only got a couple of minutes left, so
yeah.
Thanks guys for joining us again. Thanks for all your questions and for being as engaging as you were, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow for another English session. Thanks guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.